All right, welcome to our Water Connect series. This is our fourth session, and this is on wastewater. So the goal of this seminar series, panel series, is to bring together practitioners and experts from the field of water, and in this case, wastewater, and let the audience on both in-line and on person ask questions and facilitate a great discussion. So that's what we're here today doing. So I'm going to pass it off to our facilitator, who's going to introduce everyone. And currently we have about 20-ish people online, and more keep coming and filtering in. And those range from different organizations all across Vermont and far-reaching further than that as well sometimes. So here we are.
All right, thanks, Anna. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Lenz. I'm a faculty in civil and environmental engineering here at Windham. And we have three very capable panelists here this afternoon, covering the range of the wastewater spectrum issues that we all can agree affect Vermont right now. To my immediate left is Allison Smith. She is with the Vermont Rural Water Association. She is the training administrator and apprenticeship coordinator there. And she helps strengthen the water workforce through educational and hands-on training. Vermont Rural Water supports drinking water and wastewater systems across the state by providing technical assistance, training, and advocacy to protect public health and the environment. Before Vermont Rural Water was her employer, Allison worked in the constituent services and managed the internship program at U.S. Senator Patrick Leahy's Vermont offices. She also served as a volunteer specialist and assistant director for the University of Vermont 4-H program, empowering young people to discover their passions and to develop life skills under the guidance of supportive mentors. Common thread in Allison's career is her commitment to workforce development and expanding opportunities in rural communities. In Vermont Rural Water, she's dedicated to ensuring the next generation of water professionals has the training, skills, and support needed to protect the public health and maintain our vital wastewater infrastructure. Next is Chris Robinson. He is the water quality superintendent for the town of Shelburne, where he manages Shelburne's 2 advanced wastewater treatment facilities. The town is currently in the process of consolidating those facilities and upgrading one. This will be the largest capital improvement project in Shelburne, with approximately $45 million construction project. Chris is past president of the Green Mountain Water Environment Association and the past director in Vermont and the executive board member for the New England Water Environment Association. After 27 years in the wastewater industry, Chris is going to be retiring next month and plans to spend this summer at his camp in the Adirondacks and do a lot of camping and fly fishing. Nice for you, Chris. And Chris Campany is the executive director of the Windham Regional Commission based in Brattleboro. That commission serves 27 towns in southeastern Vermont. He was previously assistant professor of landscape architecture and graduate program coordinator at Mississippi State University. He was the deputy director of planning and zoning for Calvert County, Maryland, deputy commissioner for planning for Orange County, New York, federal policy coordinator for the National Campaign for Sustainable Agriculture, founder and executive director of the Baton Rouge Economic and Agricultural Development Alliance, and a presidential management intern at the US EPA in Washington, D.C. Chris holds a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and a Master of Public Policy and Administration from Mississippi State University, and a Master of Landscape Architecture from Louisiana State University. So welcome, all of you.
Thank you.
I guess, Chris, you wanted to?
Sure. So I've got a few slides I'll share. I was going to set some context. First, this is the Vermont water and wastewater landscape. Those red dots represent basically village centers, where there is neither water or wastewater. The yellow dots are wastewater only, blue is water only, and green is water and sewer. Now, in Vermont, we're talking about the need to develop a lot of housing. We talk about commercial development, industrial development, and for those of us in the room and online, what are one of the baseline things you need to develop in a smart way, and also develop what do you need? What's one of the baselines that you need? Water. Yes, and wastewater. You need the infrastructure, right? And so this map begins to tell the story of our challenge. And it also probably tells a story about our governance capacity, which I'll get to in a second. But one of the things, when I came to Vermont about 15 years ago, it was fascinating to me because from a policy context, we say a lot of the right stuff, especially about smart growth, conservation, the need to develop compact centers. But what always struck me was we don't seem to be following that up with like the actual ability to put the stuff in the ground, to do the capital improvement plans, do all the stuff you need to do to actually make the policy happen. And so it helps tell the story of Vermont. I put in a proposal to in the first round of the UVM Leahy Institute for Rural Partnerships grant program to map where wastewater systems exist in the state, like where the pipes actually run. It's not going to we're not going to be able to drill down with all of them and say exactly what capacity we have on those pipes. But to my mind, it's really important to tell the stories of the legislature and administration and towns and developers, everybody, about what is our current status, at least with regard to wastewater. Hopefully we can eventually map water, where the water systems run. There's more sensitivity there. Not many terrorists want to go after a wastewater line, but there are concerns about what they might do if they have specific geolocated information about water lines. But the idea is to start telling the story about where we can actually do all the things we say we want to do. Then the other thing, UVM, you've also been working on the zoning atlas, and then you're working on mapping of flood hazard areas. And when you overlay those three things, it's going to tell a pretty horrific story about exactly where we have our infrastructure capacity and where we can or can't build, as we need to be thinking about how do we evolve our communities up and away from climate hazards, but especially flooding. Go to the next slide. So of course, when our villages were first created, but this is something I always have to talk to our towns about. They're like, what's the issue? This village has been here forever. Well, when our villages were first created, we didn't know a lot about germs and contamination and groundwater quality and other things. But also, it took a lot of work to get water into and out of a house, right? Generally speaking, you bathe once a week, usually on Saturdays before church on Sundays. And especially for 6 months out, you had to keep it in a non-frozen state. Or when you disposed of it, you wanted to get it, far enough away to where once that thawed, you weren't going to have just an awful situation on your hands. So our villages were developed at a totally different time and a place where the water context was different. Go ahead. And so in Vermont, one of the things I love about the state is our principal planning goal is to maintain our historic settlement pattern, our historic pattern of compact settlements surrounded by rural countryside. I love in Vermont that we refer to rural countryside in statute. I'm not sure what other kind of countryside we would have, but ours is but as what this says is basically whether it's residential development, economic development, public investments, transportation, everything is supposed to hinge around this compact settlement pattern. And this is the planning directive that whether you're a regional planning commission or town planning commission, or even the state, this is what we're supposed to aspire to. And go ahead to the next slide. And it's everywhere. It's in the Vermont Comprehensive Energy Plan. It's the Long Range Transportation Plan. It's the Global Warming Solutions Act. And go ahead and go to the next slide. But the challenge is, how do you actually operationalize that without the water and wastewater infrastructure? And this is the latest planning housing target for the state by 2025-2029 period, 36,000 units. Now, obviously, this is aspirational. Obviously, we're not going to wave a magic wand and get 36,000 units, but we're really limited in where this is actually possible. And and just because you have a wastewater system doesn't necessarily mean that it has the capacity to support the housing where you need it, especially once you look into the flood hazard and other issues. So to me, a really important part of the conversation really just helping tell Vermont the story of itself and what our existing context means and how we need to move. Go to the next slide. And it's challenging, right? Because Vermont's there on my right, your left, I guess. These decisions have to get made at this hyper local level. And most of our towns, Brattleboro is our largest town in our region, population of about 12,000. Somerset is our smallest town, population of 6. And these towns have to make decisions, that, really hard to make because you're talking about significant public investment. That can be a really difficult conversation to have within a town because a lot of people take the position of why would we support wastewater in the village? I don't live in the village. Why am I going to do that to benefit those 60 households and those couple of businesses? Not like they're hamburgers anyway. But then we don't even think about subsidizing, the low density rural roads that is the primary driver of most town budgets. But so we have this really diffuse governance system, and it's really a New England problem. We have this governance structure of which has a lot going for it. But in the 2020s and going forward, this system that initially was set up in the 1600s to create these defensible town units, these defensible units of government, to basically be able to protect themselves during a period of colonization, doesn't necessarily work that well when we need to be thinking about infrastructure planning and investment at a scale that makes sense, and then to be able to operate it and maintain it and have a tax base. And the other issue we have throughout New England, generally speaking, in the absence of county government, we don't have an aggregator of public tax dollars between the municipal level and state level. So like when I was in Orange County, New York, or other counties, right, we have county taxes to pay for county scale infrastructure. You have county development plans, and it may be within one specific village or city or other area, but right, there's a plan that drives that. There's a capital improvement plan, capital investment strategy, financing at a much larger scale than a small town. And so you have the capacity to do a lot more. Generally speaking, in Vermont, we don't have that capacity. Then once you get a system built, how do you manage it? Because we literally have some water systems, and you can get into this, but I mean, you hope that the operator doesn't die because they're the only one who knows anything about how that system operates. And sometimes it's even in our region, it's passed down from like grandfather to father to son to kind of run these systems, which is not particularly sustainable. And then you add to this, right, the frequency and intensity of disasters. We have a number of wastewater systems that are in, in flood hazard areas. How do we deal with that? So to my mind, this is having this conversation about the infrastructure to support everything that we say we want, including climate adaptation and resilience, which isn't only like to make our communities more survivable, especially those that are in alluvial fans and flood hazard areas, but also, whether it's greenhouse gas reduction, more efficient use of energy, reducing vehicles miles traveled, more efficient distribution of electricity. It all hinges ultimately on infrastructure. So that's the context.
Allison, anything you want to add to that specific? I have a few questions or Chris.
Well, I'll comment a little bit on that. Absolutely right. Scalable is the big issue. Looking at more of a countywide structure when it comes to resources, I think is going to be critical for infrastructure and stuff like that versus just looking at everything from just a municipal lens. Definitely, we have a lot of challenges. We talk about the infrastructure itself. A lot of this infrastructure was installed, 50s, 60s, 70s. A lot of the piping in the ground with life expectancies of 60, 70 years. We're at the max. So when we're looking at expanding resources, right, expanding capabilities for more housing and stuff like that, we're having an issue right now just dealing with the infrastructure we already own. So we have the infrastructure that we already own, plus adding new infrastructure for these demands. So it's going to be definitely a challenging time.
Allison?
Yeah, I would be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to just dovetail into what both of you have said, but to really hit home that even with the resources and the upgrades and the improved technology, without a workforce to meet the needs, the two of those things need to move in line together. U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics projects that 100,000 openings in the water industry will be open each year for the next decade. And on top of that, we're seeing 6% retirements and people leaving the career to go on to other opportunities. So we're at Vermont Rural Water Association. A lot of our efforts are looking at how can we retain the workforce, but how we can also broaden the workforce, invite more people in. We need a workforce that's capable of taking on these new technologies. And I think also a workforce that can communicate the complexities that systems are facing, and why those decisions that you were talking about making on a community level, how those improvements really benefit everyone and benefit more than just the immediate wastewater system, right? But really trickle down to the economy and being able to build housing.
Thanks. Any questions from this audience or online? Yeah. I'm going to ask Chris about Shelburne's wastewater, and the question is, there are advances in wastewater technology that are being developed. Have you seen anything in particular in what you're looking to do in Shelburne that might be worth sharing here as far as advanced technology and how that may also affect the workforce needs?
Sure. So there's technologies that's being developed, but not so much technology that's applicable to the scale of a municipal wastewater system. A lot of stuff is in research. I'll bring up the issue of PFAS, for instance. Those substances are going to be complex here in the next decade. It's going to be an issue that at some point it's going to be written into our permits that we have to remove it. Right now, there's not technology at scalable size to do that, but that's something that's is definitely going to come down the pike at some time. Right now, I think the main focus lately has been phosphorus for Lake Champlain and making sure that we can meet those shouldn't say new requirements. It's requirements that came down back in, must have been the early 2000s, maybe 2016 timeframe, where the phosphorus discharge limits have gone from typically a 0.8 milligram per liter down to a 0.2 milligram per liter. So we've seen some restrictions on our discharge and stuff like that. To bring up that, I also want to point out that when we look at the whole phosphorus loading going to Lake Champlain, it's not necessarily, a lot of it's not coming from the wastewater sector. Back in 2015, they were saying it was just over 3% of the phosphorus loading to Lake Champlain. Looking at the Lake Champlain Basin program, which is more recent data, it says around 6% is coming from wastewater. So there's a lot more lower hanging fruit to be had than the wastewater side, cleaning up Lake Champlain. So, but yeah, as far as the rest of the infrastructure and waste and what we're looking at in Shelburne is basically just to meet what we think is going to be coming up for permit requirements and in extra capacity. We're not adding additional capacity. We're bringing the two facilities that we have now, which is a 1.1 million gallon a day combination. I'm bringing that to one location to still being a 1.1 MGD.
Can I ask something real quick about the PFAS situation? So we had a town get a grant to actually develop, engineer, and implement a system. And one of the issues though is that over the years, a school, totally innocently had been putting cleaning product into their septic system. And so in this case, the school was in a village, and with residences close proximity. So some of the wells for those residences were testing positive. So that created another challenge for putting in. So it's going to be a distributed wastewater system, right? Soil based. In a distributed system, right? It may look different in different parts of the village, right? It may be everybody in some parts, everybody maintains their individual septic and tank and distribution field. In other cases, maybe everybody maintains their septic tank that goes to a common distribution field, or maybe in other cases, everything gets piped to a common septic tank and field. But the issue was that before you could put in a new system, they had to deal with the PFAS because you didn't want to then create another PFAS point source for PFAS getting into groundwater. And so they're trying to figure out how do we treat it? And so they're saying, well, really the village also needs a water system. We had EPA rules said, wait, but you don't have the capacity to establish and run a water system. And so there were a lot of conversations going back and forth. Ultimately, the town, it was for a number of reasons, the town was really struggling to find a site for a suitable distribution field, regardless of the PFAS situation. So they had to walk away from the grant. But I just wanted to note, but that's something I had actually, before this project started, I hadn't thought about. Like, you really do have to figure out what's your inputs, what's contributing to the outputs that could ultimately then create like a whole other problem with your new system. So that was just, anyway, and it underscores the complexity of the capacity of towns to actually manage whatever it is that they develop.
It is wastewater, so.
Yeah.
Can I just expand on that a little bit? So you touched on the fact that people were putting cleaning agents and stuff. So one thing I have to defend, I guess, in a sense, the wastewater industry is the wastewater facilities don't discharge phosphorus to Lake Champlain. It's everyone that is discharging to the wastewater facility is discharging to Lake Champlain. We intercept it and treat it to the best levels of technology that we have.
It's not like you're
facility. So when you talk about PFAS, for instance, PFAS isn't generated and created at the wastewater facility. That's coming to us from the residents and industry and stuff like that. So just wanted to put a shout out for the wastewater facilities that, we do a lot of environmental protection every single day. What we remove from the wastewater that's coming back in, before wastewater treatment, a lot of stuff was direct piped right to the waterways and stuff like that. So whatever was coming from your home or industry went straight to the rivers and lakes and stuff. Wastewater treatment was a huge advancement in trying to clean up the environment, and it still is today.
Question back there.
Yeah, Chris, you mentioned that phosphorus coming out of wastewater treatment plants was 3 to 6%, depending on which version of the report. My understanding is that some of the phosphorus is permitted because you're getting phosphorus in normal wastewater and you remove most of it. But then we also have events where particularly in Burlington and some of the other ones, where we have storm water that infiltrates or overflows into the way they're coming into systems. Do you happen to know of that 6%? How much of it is sort of regular emissions because we're bringing in wastewater with phosphorus and we have a little bit of phosphorus left, versus how much is events where the wastewater plants can't treat the waste properly, so they simply have to pass it through? Do you have?
I don't know specifically the numbers. I can tell you that wastewater itself makes up 99.9% water.
Right.
And it's only that 0.1% is actually solids and waste and stuff like that. When you add that during a CSO, for instance, confined sewer overflow, when you actually add stormwater to that dilution even drops even further. So it was interesting because it was told to me from a gentleman down in the Rutland area that they looked at what CSOs were doing and the hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars it was going to take to separate their stormwater system. If people don't understand, stormwater and wastewater are usually separate, but in some older communities, they're combined. So your stormwater and wastewater run through the same pipes and go to the wastewater facility. Wastewater treats phosphorus to a much higher standard than any stormwater practice can. And by actually separating the stormwater from the wastewater system in Rutland, for instance, they were actually shown it was going to actually pollute the lake more than if it was to keep it into the actual wastewater treatment system and keep it that way, even including the combined sewer overflows. So it's an interesting, because we have limited resources, limited amount of money out there, right? So we need to make sure we're putting the money to where we're going to get the best benefit.
That actually was very much on that same topic, the combined sewer and storm.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, the workforce question. What types of jobs are you talking about? I mean, because my mind is it chemists? Is it engineers? Is it road crew? Like what,
It's all of the above,
Okay.
for sure. But I can certainly give you more, input. So Vermont Rural Water Association, we actually have an apprenticeship program that started in 2019, and that's very much specifically focused on drinking water and wastewater operators and building that specific capacity there. We have 20 apprentices who are currently in the program, and 6 of them are currently wastewater. When we first started the program, actually many more were wastewater. It's a 2-year program, so we're seeing different groups move through, and now actually the pendulum, it was wastewater, so water operators, and now we're signing on more wastewater operators, which is very exciting. But with that being said, that's our specific focus through the Department of Labor and National Rural Water Association. However, part of my message to young people, or when I come to UVM and career fairs, is that yes, we need the engineers, we need lab technicians, we need GIS specialists, and then also many of the people that I work with to provide training to current operators or aspiring operators. They are people who have had careers in water and then found a niche. They really like pumps, they really like filters, they like the chemical handling side of things. And I'm here to tell you that all these people, many of them have gone on to start their own businesses as, I would say, more or less the final chapter of their career, because they're the expert, they're having fun doing what they like what they do. But, the question always lingers, what are we going to do when Chris decides to go fly fishing in the Adirondacks? And so these are, and one thing that we've seen in the apprenticeship program, it gives us some data, is when the program was first created, wages were relatively low. And Chris and I were actually talking about this. But now we're seeing a much more competitive market. So municipalities are going out to look for, these people. And one thing I just want to mention is that some of the positions are combined with Department of Public Works, which I do like to mention that, because if you are someone who likes the occasional day at the office, but then also wants to be out there using heavy machinery or using all your 5 senses when you go out to the plant. These are really dynamic positions that are now starting to pay competitive wages, especially when I look to the rural corners of Vermont. With municipalities, you receive benefits, you might have, paid time off. So it's exciting to see these opportunities, but we're learning how to become better PR people to let folks know that they're good jobs. Yeah.
That's a good point. Beverly.
Well, do you want to say something about how we're doing that in partnership with you at UVM, thanks to the Leahy Institute?
Yeah, certainly. So Vermont Rural Water is very excited through the Leahy Center for Rural Partnerships to embark on this journey with Water Resources Institute. And we have really twofold goals, is to work with student researchers to collect more information on the water workforce. So that might be trends of people who are currently in the workforce, but also who, as Beverly has been really great at reminding me of, we need to ask the people who aren't looking at this as a career path and figure out what would the key be to opening that door and drawing them in. And then the second part is getting students out, to touring facilities. Many people have never been to their local wastewater or water facility, although I do meet a good number of people, and I just find this encouraging for a project, that when I meet them, they're like, when I was in 5th grade, we walked to our wastewater treatment plant. And it's like this memory that's often embedded for people. And I think that's really powerful, because then they know when you start to talk about some of these things like housing and development, they can picture a real place in their mind that brings meaning to their community and makes their community livable. So we're doing the tours. We are hoping to do a UVM Go pre-orientation program, which really would connect students to seeing those systems out in the community. But I like to think connecting them to a sense of place here in Vermont to see both, yes, how water is treated, but also the natural landscape that we are so lucky and fortunate to have here in Vermont, our lakes and our rivers, and that greater level watershed in the story there. And I feel like I'm missing a part of it, but we're hoping to really build on. Oh, of course, Dr. John Lenz has been a great partner to us in connecting students in the engineering program with community projects, often in wastewater and water, some of these really quirky rural systems that have very little capacity, very little money, and we can say, would you like a group of students who are studying engineering to come out and problem solve, that you have X amount of pipe on the top of the ground discharging, water into your local water source or something. So it's been really powerful to be able to leverage students in that way.
It's very rewarding for the students. It's a very nice contained project for the students and huge reward and eye-opening for sure. Any other questions? I'll say that one thing that I've observed in dealing with this industry is the pride that people take in doing the work. There's a heck of a difference between what comes in, and they love to show you at the plant what it looks like coming out. And you wouldn't drink it, but it looks like you could.
And on that note, when you were asking about technologies, one of the first plants that when I entered into this career that I was able to visit is the Waterbury plant, which uses what they call a COMAG system. So it's a tertiary treatment. So you have older technologies, things like settling and biological processes, but in Waterbury, they use a lagoon system, so the older technology, and then they actually use a chemical process and magnetite, which helps to get the rest of the dissolved solids out of the water. And they're able to actually reclaim most of the magnetite, which is, I think, very cool. And I'll loosely quote them, but many other operators, when I'm in training with them, I've heard operators say, if you gave me $5, I would drink what we're discharging into Winooski. They're like, I won't do it because I'm not supposed to. But that sense of pride that operators, and when you walk through the system and you see what's coming in and what's going out, it's very evident, the sense of pride, and mixed with that technology and the ability to remove so much.
I have an online question for whoever feels most inclined to answer. There's some research happening at UVM and elsewhere around alternatives to traditional wastewater systems, things like compost toilets and reuse of waste for farming. What's the feasibility of these more creative solutions, if any, in our rural communities?
What do you think?
We actually partnered with, there's a group in Brattleboro called the Richards Institute that's looking at urine diversion systems. And because I have a background like in regenerative agriculture and all too, I love the concept. But part of what they're doing is showing that what the idea is, you separate the urine, number one from the number two. There are specific, like whether it's a toilet seat or an actual toilet designed to do this. And what they do is they solar pasteurize the urine, and they can do a direct application or dilute it and apply it. They've applied it like to pasture. They've also had tested some vegetable plots. And the idea is, right, is you take something that otherwise be a waste product, or even going through a wastewater treatment plant and having to go through that more energy intensive process, actually applying it as a resource to the land, which is what historically we had done. The other interesting thing, please don't quote me on this, but like they were using caffeine as a marker to see like, so what about pharmaceuticals going through? And they found that it was almost undetectable once it went through the solarization and soil process. So that's, if you think about it, that's one of the really persistent things that can be challenging for a wastewater system conventionally to do it. And then also just the rules and regs governing these alternative systems can be really restrictive and limit their application when they could actually be a reasonable solution to, like, even if it doesn't necessarily apply to like a village or downtown scale, at least like maybe a conservation subdivision or something. But that's when you kind of cluster the houses on a property on smaller lots, so you don't have the spread all over the landscape.
Or seasonal homes.
Yeah, seasonal homes too. So I think they definitely have a role. Oh, sorry, but what we're partnered with them on is we work with 2 villages in our region. One is working with the planning commission, that's working with a volunteer group to see what it might take to have to adopt it at a neighborhood scale, like getting past the ick factor. So a lot of people just don't like to think about it. They just want to do their business and flush it goes away. It was really interesting. We weren't able to ultimately like pilot the installation of systems, but it seemed to be, and again, this is a sample size of 2, that kind of the more community-based type, like volunteer type context, it was probably more likely that they might be more apt to adopt as opposed to like going through a more formal municipal approach. But it's a great group. I mean, they've done great research, and I hope that with all the federal research cuts, they're still hanging in there. But I think there's definitely a role. But you guys are more in the technical world. So what's your take on it?
I'm seeing, some of the logistics of it, from a large scale. I think it would be a little difficult, but I'm thinking, small HOAs, adopting it in these rural communities. Some of these lake shore homes and stuff that have like a little HOA sometimes, or doing something on a small scale like that, I think would be beneficial. I don't think it's going to solve our large scale.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not gonna help. I don't think too much with the 36,000 homes.
A composting toilet at an Underhill campsite is different than
Correct.
300 room tenement.
Like my seasonal camp I had in the Adirondacks, right? Something like that would be a perfect little system to put in.
You have a question?
I was gonna comment on Allison's point and yours, that students really like engaging with this, that your point about the job satisfaction that operators convey was quite evident in the first group of UVM students that we took out in this partnership. That was one of the things in the post-trip survey that they narrowed in on, was how inspired they were by the job satisfaction of the operators. And our students at universities all over the country today are looking for reasons for hope. And the idea of moving into a job pathway that gives them reason to give back and be hopeful is something we would really like to leverage and grow.
And to expand on, why the operators, you think about it, right? Every day they have to sample, they see what comes into the facility, they see what goes out of the facility, and they know it's because of what they're doing that's happening. And it can be sometimes even just as simple as a pump goes down, right? And you go and repair that pump and now it's back up and running. There's a lot of sense of accomplishment every day. It's not one of these jobs. That's another thing about the job is all kinds of, you mentioned it, all kinds of things. You could be spending a couple hours in the lab, and then the next day you could be doing, sweeping the floors, to the next thing, pulling a pump and rebuilding a pump, then jumping on the computer and working on the GIS and getting that up to date. So it's all over the board on what a lot of the operators, and especially in a small state like Vermont, where we don't have really large facilities. You take some of these 100 MGD facilities where you go to work every day, and I go in and I'm the SCADA guy, and that's all I do every day is work on the SCADA. And this person over here, all he does every day is run BOD tests in the lab. This one over here runs phosphorus tests in the lab. And that's what they do every day in Vermont. Because we're such small facilities, everybody learns to do everything. And that, I think, helps.
I have a story to share about that. I have a colleague that I worked with for a number of years doing road design and water system design. And this colleague then went to work for an engineering company doing mechanical, electrical work. And the opportunity came up to switch gears completely and work in the wastewater system in a moderate-sized Vermont community. And he actually came to one of our professional meetings and said, "You know what I love about this? In 2 weeks, I know whether what I decided to do works or not."
Yeah, there's a lot of lead time.
And that's, we're in consulting, things take a while, as they maybe should, it takes time to develop a project. So there's a lot of, I guess you could call it immediate gratification, or at least quick feedback. And it's a great learning opportunity. So I think it's communicating to our youth, or anybody that wants to change careers, what's out there. It's not really obvious what people do in this profession.
And I appreciate that you mentioned changing careers. Sometimes when you hear the word apprentice, you might have a vision in your mind of what that person looks like, but we have apprentices who span gender, age range, and folks who are, newly out of college or high school. But we also have a number of apprentices who have made a career change as well. And so I just appreciate that, people are finding themselves in the water workforce And whenever that happens, they seem to be really happy that they found it.
I have an online question, back to PFAS. Are Vermont facilities testing and treating for PFAS?
There was some sampling that was done that the state did throughout a bunch of the facilities, but I have not seen any of the results of those tests.
Yeah, I'm not aware specifically.
What is it, Brattleboro had the initial
Bennington.
legislative, Bennington? What, did they end up putting in a water system? Because it was in the groundwater, wasn't it? That was the issue.
Yeah, it was in the groundwater. I think they ended up, I don't know how they remediated that, if they put in some drinking water side. So I'm not sure exactly what they did. If they put in a treatment system and piped it out to all the people who were on individual wells, or what they did.
And then
Yeah. So as issues like flooding are becoming worse, has that like changed how like these towns are looking at their wastewater infrastructure at all? Or or like has like anything like changed with these kinds of things?
Yeah, so definitely with all the flooding that we've had, take Johnson, for instance, Johnson, Vermont got hammered. So did a lot of Ludlow and other facilities, but I think what they're doing is they're designing them now. It'd be nice if they could just relocate them to a higher elevation, but unfortunately, as you know, because everything gravity flows, right? They try to build them at the lowest point so everything can flow by gravity and not have to pump everything, because that costs money and so forth. So, but yeah, I think they're trying to build walls up higher so that the rivers do flood, they don't get into the basins, making sure that the backup generators and the electrical equipment is raised in elevation and moved out of the way and stuff, so that if these types of things come and hit us again, the facility can still keep up and running.
I just came out of a whole conversation around resilient infrastructure, what strategy, what the state's approach should be to all this. And one of the challenges is I think it's actually kind of failure of imagination, right? Or you're going after like what, FEMA, when they do the flood insurance rate maps, which determine like the map flood hazard areas, they always look backwards. And if you think about it, we really have to look at like, the greenhouse gas profile, what we're anticipating is going to happen. And, you can't draw, well, at least I'm not aware that you can draw necessarily a precise line between like that and then intensity of storms and quantities of precipitation. But we know the incredible change we've seen in Vermont and New England. We're particularly challenged here because whatever weather system enters the United States from the west generally exits right over top of us. And so part of the challenge is how far out do you plan? Because we're at the beginning of this. We're not at the end. Even if we go carbon neutral tomorrow, what we've already pumped.
A lot of inertia.
Yeah. It's just, and it's hard. And this goes down like, I don't want to go too far afield, but it's even like, municipal road crews and like sizing of culverts and bridges and everything else. We keep talking about, bank full plus a quarter width and, or plus a quarter depth. And, it's just like, that's probably way under designing for what's coming. And even on an individual septic and well, what we're seeing now, I'm on the State Hazard Mitigation Grant Project Review Committee. And increasingly, where we're seeing just violent flooding and fluvial erosion is on these just unnamed blue line streams, or even just unnamed drainages that are dumping cobbles and boulders over the cars and up to the eaves of these homes, and just ripping out these systems. And so we just have to plan for a future that accommodates all that. And I'll just end with, for folk who are really interested in conservation and forest block continuity and habitat block continuity, you need to be vested in this compact settlement concept and these systems, because the alternative pattern, which is what we have, the dominant pattern we have here now in Vermont, really around most of the country, is rural sprawl. Mm-hmm. And the alternative, so we really need to figure out how do we keep forests as forests, understory as understory, forest soils as forest soils, because it's not going to solve every problem, and you know, it'll also help buffer against drought too, right? So really having to looking at this as a system. So you've heard me speak to like Nature Conservancy and others about like the flip side of the conservation coin is the compact settlement coin, and that's critical to our future survivability, really.
We've been talking about wastewater, not so much flood issues. You just brought some up, but there's another aspect of that where historically, traditionally, we have concentrated our development in floodplains, in the river corridors. And that's why we have waterberries and berries and, you know, file cabinets washing down the river. So you want consolidated developments, but we have to move them. We already have consolidated developments, but they're in the wrong spot.
And I think, to me, from our planning approach, the way I think of it, where I grew up in southwestern Virginia, there are some communities that have moved, especially up in the coal fields. It's pretty easy when you've got the technology and equipment to take the tops off of mountains. You know, blowing a bigger gap in a valley and blowing through bigger tunnels to, you know, and then having the places to actually move the community up. That's you know, that's been done, but it's incredibly expensive. But the way I look at it is evolving communities up in a way. So like when you make these infrastructure investments, start this is put on my landscape architect hat. We really need to like physically master plan these things. So like, how do you grow this village or downtown? Where is it appropriate? How do you still maintain like the habitat connectors that may run through or nearby? But that's where you start need to doing your capital improvement planning and your and everything to actually physically plan where this housing and everything else is going to go, so that you're planning for the next generations. Because at some point, your existing downtown or village center or whatever may not be viable, especially the ones that we have on the alluvial fans.
After you rebuild it for the third time, maybe you should put it someplace else.
A question in the back?
Yeah, and I'm not sure this question is even answerable at this point in time, but I'm curious to know any thoughts. So historically, as towns have wanted to upgrade or replace wastewater treatment systems, there have been funds available. I think the state administers them, but they ultimately originate from the federal government. Do we know right now, is the federal government sort of changing their direction at all to prioritize different things, to deprioritize this altogether, to encourage us further? Where do we see this going in the short term? Or do we just not know?
Well, I would love to put a plug in. So Vermont Rural Water Association is part of National Rural Water Association. And we currently have a campaign going right now, which is called Rural Water Strong. And we're asking everyday citizens to sign on to it, because what we call the WEP programs, water environment programs, which do help to fund many of these rural water and wastewater upgrades, as well as staff many of the technical positions with Vermont Rural Water Association, our wastewater folks who go out for the everyday, you know, technical help, but also when we have floods and things, and help get systems back online. Those programs are currently being looked at to be eliminated, and we know that they'll have very detrimental effects if so. So that's my short plug for that.
I have heard, because we've got the financing for the facilities in Shelburne coming up. And I have heard through the state revolving fund, which, you know, state revolving fund. So federal monies did come in, have been in. The state then lends the money out and we pay it back to the state. So the state is kind of running their own system. They still get a little bit of funding from the federal government, but from what I'm hearing from the SRF program, as far as, you know, we look at a $45 million wastewater upgrade, and that money is still secure and fine. So we don't have anything to worry about at this point. Where that comes down 5 years down, 10 years down the road from now could be different. So
I would pay really close attention to what's happening in emergency management and response area. So Vermont, like a lot of the hazard mitigation money, the vast majority of that, by a huge percentage, comes from these disasters that we experience as formula-based funding. And so we get way more money through that than we do like during the blue sky, like what's called the BRIC program, Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program. And so, and then like being a block grant disaster recovery, that actually helps. It's a significant funding like to help rebuild infrastructure. But it's my understanding that, like the communal block grant disaster recovery fund staff at HUD has been reduced by 87%. They may have their jobs back now temporary. I don't know. It's all kind of a moving target, but still, it's going to have an impact regardless of how it all shakes out. And I think the BRIC program at FEMA is my understanding that I think 50-something% of the staff were laid off. Now maybe they're back again. But then at some point, I think, and this isn't a political statement, you need to read like Project 2025 and other things, because that is a policy directive that the director of the Office of Management and Budget co-wrote. And at some point, I think we have to believe that they're going to do what they said they're going to do as a policy statement. And so maybe that will manifest itself or won't, but we at least owe it to ourselves to, again, whether you're for it or against it or don't care, just to understand what's likely to come. Because like emergency planning, I don't know that, don't quote me on this exact number, but Vermont Emergency Management, I know at least like their planning functions, it's my understanding they're like, that's 90% federal funds that support that. And under the Project 2025, they talk about basically eliminating or phasing out funding for local and state emergency preparedness, because they're saying that's a local and state responsibility. They talk about increasing the thresholds for disaster before you can have a federally declared disaster. Vermont has had 10 since 2019, and we benefit from this low threshold of $1 million, right? Because you can have a couple of culverts blow out in a town, and that's $1 million. They're talking about increasing that, and that would be significantly impactful to Vermont. And then I remember during the California situation, the administration talked about administrative official, as I recall. I'm the primary point person on emergency planning for Vermont's 11 RPCs, which is why I've kind of been digging deep into this. They're talking about like inverting the federal state formula to where it's right now it's 75% federal match, 25% local and state match. We're talking about inverting that to where it's 75% state local, 25% federal. And so that could have a huge impact, not just on Vermont, but everybody. But I think, so the meeting I was in before this was the state treasurer's resiliency infrastructure strategy, or RIS, let's just call it the RIS. But I think since 2011, in the last 15 years, he said that Vermont has gotten basically $680 per capita through federal disaster funds. So what does it look like if that goes away?
Sure.
We're coming up to the last 5 minutes. I wanted to thank the panelists for coming, and I am sparked by Chris Campany's mention of a master plan earlier. And I'm wondering if each of the three of you might say something about what you could say to us at the university if we were to like create some master plan to address this challenge out there. What should we at the university be paying attention to, helping with, given our role, educating students, conducting research, those kinds of things? What should our master plan be?
Well, I mean, in part, I feel like the grant through the Lead Institute for Rural Partnerships is helping us to lay the foundation for this. But Vermont Rural Water Association, we're a staff of 11 people covering the whole state and trying to support all of Vermont in its both water and wastewater systems. And so being able to look at some of these big picture issues and really collect data, even attending last Friday, the World Water Week event, and hearing some of the data from UNH about snowpack and how that's changing the infiltration of water in soils. This is the kind of research that you can see things anecdotally on the ground, but when you have numbers and you have a lexicon to put to them, and when that does come to making your case for local communities or oftentimes Vermont Rural Water advocating upwards, through the state, federal legislators and regulators, helping to get our message across. Anytime that there's a question out there in the industry that the university can, pose those questions and put some people power behind to bring research, I think is helpful. I don't know if that's specific enough, but.
Yeah.
When I think of a master plan, specifically a statewide type master plan, I think there's going to be a lot of roadblocks and a lot of resistance. Jurisdictional boundaries will play a big role. Some communities don't want to give up their control of their community. I think it's going to be a tough road to go, but I think, I think you're going to have to try and get buy-in from the state. And it's going to have to come as a state directive down to the municipalities. I don't think it's going to work from the bottom up. But yeah, I think it's just seeing the small stuff that we've been trying to do in regionalizing different sectors and stuff like that has been challenging. And again, it's just, I think when you try to look at a master plan, I think it's great to get a master plan together and then try to get the buy-in of specific segments of the town or the state. Maybe these two counties, for instance, might be on board with that. And most of those communities want to move forward with that, but to try to get it on a statewide thing would be a bit difficult.
So I am proudly a product of land grant universities, and I went to the old Cal colleges. The Mississippi State University used to be Mississippi State A&M, and of course LSU was the land grant was 1862, and then Southern University had the other HBCU land grants, and they were fantastic. And I would just encourage Vermont to embrace that more. I think that's one of the great things to me about the Leahy Institute, is really trying to get the greater access to faculty and students and to Vermonters and vice versa. I understood exactly what was happening because elsewhere I've gone to school in other places, it's just way more common than what I find, at least in Vermont. We're doing a lot more work in our region because of our proximity to UMass Amherst, doing a lot of work with them. And they've kind of embraced working with us, but I think just building that relationship. Frankly, I think the state should invest a lot more of its own money in UVM. I think the return on the investment will be tremendous. I don't know that the culture within the university and then within the state yet to kind of understand that. If you go to like other rural states and so especially like I'm used to southern states, I'd say it's also the case for Midwest and elsewhere. The land grant universities are everywhere. Students interact regularly with extension functions, not just like 4-H and FFA and other things, but they're out there on community water and wastewater. And the other thing too that the role the university can play is like doing these objective analyses, like even around governance and other things, kind of an apolitical, objective research into like different governance structures or whatever it may be, but like basically become like a laboratory to explore ideas that the state can pursue. I at Mississippi State, there was a Stennis Institute of Government, which looked at actually these really powerful county supervisors who were elected. They wielded incredible power within their counties. So but the university came with this design to where they basically established a county legislature, and it's up to the state county whether or not they want to adopt it. Like that kind of research was transformational in the state of Mississippi. And that's the kind of very practical applied research you can do, across the board. So, and one last thing I'll say, just having, former university faculty, ultimately, and this is going to get deep into the weeds, but like since it's part of a master plan, you have to reward the tenure promotion process. It can't just be all research that gets you promotion and tenure. It has to also be, if you're going to do service and service learning, you have to get rewarded for that. Because it needs to be part of the core mission of everyone involved, not just an afterthought. Because otherwise, how do you dedicate the time and effort that it takes to do it? If you do really well and excel at that, and you're in your 5th year, bye-bye, because you didn't your quantity wasn't enough. You didn't publish enough articles. So, and I don't know what the dynamic is at UVM, but I just know culturally. I mean, that was one of the challenges when I was at Mississippi State. They told us you can do all this other stuff, but you gotta do the research, which of course also ties to the money. And so just that whole university ecosystem, we need to figure out what that looks like, especially with the federal cuts and apparent federal control of what universities are going to do under this administration. We have to figure out how to help the universities survive, and bring them into communities maybe core to that. That's way more than you wanted for this.
All right, we're there. All
We
right.
are there.
Thank you, Allison, Chris, and Chris very much for this, and thank you, audience, for your thoughtful questions.
Our next session is April 14th, and that's water and agriculture, so we hope all of you can join us. Thank you, and there's snacks right here.